Also, I look towards the sort of references to nature, natural phenomenon in the Quran, keeping an eye open there for inconsistencies, false, erroneous notions. Because, you know, back in the 7th century, there were many false, erroneous notions about how nature works. And, excuse me, there are many such false, erroneous notions. And I would assume that they would be in the scripture, some of them. Because if you look at the ancient scriptures of other peoples, you'll inevitably find some. I'm not putting them down. I'm not making any judgment about other scriptures. It was just something I expected to see. But when I read the Quran and read what it had to say about the nature and its workings and natural phenomenon, I could find no erroneous notions that conflicted with what we now know, what modern science has taught us. And so oftentimes, as I read through that, I would discover verses that referred to natural phenomenon that had a certain intriguing style about it. You know, for example, there's a verse that goes, have not the unbelievers seen that the heavens and the earth were at one time one, and we exploded them apart, and that every living thing is made from water. And when I read that verse, I said, you know, what is the author referring to here? I mean, this is a guy in the 7th century. That is a peculiar statement to make that long ago. Have not the unbelievers seen? Have not the unbelievers seen? Why does he say the unbelievers? Why didn't he say the believers? Have not the unbelievers seen that the heavens and the earth were at one time one, and we exploded them apart, and that every living creature is made from water? I mean, is he referring to the fact that most human beings, every living cell is at least 70% water? I mean, I had no idea what he was referring to, but it was an intriguing statement. The heavens and the earth were at one times one, and it was exploding apart, making allusion to what? The Big Bang? Impossible, of course, I thought, impossible. But still, it was an extremely intriguing reference. You know, he talks in the Quran how the earth and the sun and the moon each swim through their courses in a circle, in a circular motion. What? I mean, who in the 7th century believed the sun traveled in a circle or the earth traveled in a circle? It was a strange statement to make, I thought, way back then. And there were many such statements. It says in the Quran, in the heavens and the earth. No, it says, in the heavens we are expanding it. In the heavens we are expanding it? What do you mean you're stretching the heavens? You're expanding the heavens. Of course, today we know about the expansion of the universe, and I wasn't assuming that that's what it was saying. But there were just statements in the Quran that had a sort of uncanny resemblance to things that we've come to know or believe in. I wasn't insisting to myself, I wasn't a Muslim at the time. I'm not insisting to myself that that was what it was referring to. But it definitely piqued my curiosity. But more importantly, as I read through the Quran, I couldn't find any such reference to natural phenomena that conflicted with what we now believe scientifically. Once again, though, I mean, the statements, they're not explicit enough to fully elaborate a scientific theory. So even though it's the initial audience of the Quran may have turned their head at it and thought, what does this verse mean? Still, it wasn't something that conflicted with what they believed. But at the same time, for a person living in the 20th century, he reads that, it doesn't conflict with what he believes either, and it piques his interest. It seemed that the so-called signs from nature in the Quran kind of fulfilled a role similar to what the stories did for the ancient audience. It drew their attention, captured their imagination, piqued their interest, without violating anything they held sacred, that they were firmly convinced of. In the same way, these references to nature did the same for us, or did the same for me, I should say, without conflicting what I firmly believe. So I thought, I mean, this author is something of a genius. Because I tried to imagine how he did this. I mean, how did he go about doing this? I mean, he was so clever, I thought, that when he related historical references, he must have thought that could be potential conflicts when he related them with what people would later find out. So therefore, he removed all historical reference points. But on the other hand, when he does relate these historical reference points, he does provide certain kinds of details that he uses them in such a way that he's making very profound and powerful moral and spiritual points. Now, how did he do with these science things? I don't know. He started making these certain scientific statements that would definitely pique people's notions, but somehow he was able to do it in such a delicate and intricate and ambiguous way, so that he was able to do it in such a way that it would pique people's interest without conflicting with anybody's scientific knowledge. I thought, this author is a genius beyond any I could ever possibly imagine. Because not only that, I mean, he wrote a scripture that is so powerful that it forces you almost, or it forced me, to engage in conversation with it. Its literary power was tremendous. I mean, when I read the stories in the Quran, I mean, they're powerful, they're beautiful, they move with a rapid pace. It's like watching one of those exciting, because I often don't find these exciting, television soap operas, except in verbal form. Because you know when you watch these television soap operas at night, suddenly you see a scene, and a conversation begins here, and then they shift immediately to another scene that sort of relates this scene to that scene with no break in continuity of thought. When I read through the Quran, you know, the stories were just so powerful. The literature, the economy of expression was so great. I'll just give you a quick example. When I read the story of Yusuf, for example, you read that story, you shift from one scene to the other without breaking the continuity of thought, and verse by verse by verse, you're going from one scene to another. So here you have Yusuf talking to his cellmates. The next verse, one of the cellmates is carrying the conversation to the ruler. The next verse, the ruler tells the cellmate, tells this guy to go find this man who gave you this information. Then the very next scene, you're in prison, and he's talking to him. And all along, each verse by verse is carrying on a conversation that's perfectly continuous, even though the scene is shifting from one place to the next, to the next, to the next. So verbally, you have this transition of place going on in your mind. And just like in modern television, it captures your imagination because of the scene shifts. You notice nowadays, in television, they talk about 4 seconds about this scene and then 4 seconds about this scene. They don't let any scene last too long because they know people's minds wander. They look too long at the same scene. Brilliant literary style. I thought this author was extremely brilliant in his style, in the way he used the natural signs, in the way he told these stories, in the way he was able to present all this without conflicting, without opening himself up to historical or scientific criticism. I thought it was amazing. I thought he was brilliant. I thought he must have known human psychology very well, and human nature, the way he was able to lure you into conversation with the Quran.